You may be seated. Well, what do you do when you're hurt? We all do it different ways. This is a trivia question. I know a lot of times Pastor Cindy will give us homework. I'm going to give you the homework, but I got a question for you to begin with. A lot of times people say to me, "Can I ask you a question?" And I'll say, "Yeah, but you go first." Because I find it easier to know what the question is. So you give me your answer. Well, this is your trivia question. In 1971, a major corporation came out with a jingle to advertise its product. I'm going to tell you the jingle, and then you tell me. Age will also describe you in this. You tell me what was the corporation. You deserve a break today. So get up and get away to what, Derek? McDonald's. Somebody said up there, what? Who was the confessor up there in the choir? What did you say? Oh, you did say McDonald's. Okay, good. I don't know who that is, but I'm going to guess it's not a teenager. In 1971, they first came up with the phrase, "You deserve to get away, so get up," and talked about an island paradise from a company in Nebraska. And they already had the song patented. So McDonald's, the writers of the ad, changed the wording, "You deserve a break today." You know what that means? I need some time. I need some time to back away, to clear my heart and my head. Psychologists have told us for years and years and years and years that every human being has 4 dimensions or arenas. Those arenas, the 4-H practiced it long ago, but the 4 arenas are our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. Our emotions, our mental, our physical, and our spiritual. And like your automobile, when all 4 of those are working perfectly, you don't even give it a thought. You just go on down the road. But something begins to sputter. The warning light from your tire come on to tell you your so-and-so tire is low. Sometimes I don't want all that information. I like just keep driving. Because when it goes flat, I know what I'll do. But the whole information out there is for us. And so we must learn to live our lives in sync, including our heart. Our love is not just in our heart. Fran said it pretty well a moment ago. She'd done her homework. She looked at the verses I was going to be speaking of. Thank you. And she knew that we were going to be talking about the love of God. But the love of God is something that doesn't just happen in our heart. It also happens in our feet, and in our hands, and in our minds, and in our soul. And when all parts of our body are working fine, we seem to do really, really well. When we look at these scriptures, we understand pretty quickly that Simon Peter is hurting. Now, Jesus had already done what he could to address the hurts of Simon Peter, because on the morning that he was resurrected, Christ Jesus said to the women who came to the tomb, you know, we have different accounts of different visitors to the tomb. But when Mary Magdalene and Mary and Salome came to the tomb, they didn't recognize Jesus. There was someone dressed in a white robe sitting there where the body had been placed. And the person in there, whomever, whatever it was, spoke and said, "He is not here. He is risen. Go and tell my disciples," and listen to this, "and Peter." You think Jesus didn't know Peter was hurting? He got a special invitation, not because he was special, but at that moment, as Jesus read the hearts and the minds and the soul and the strength of those people that had followed him so closely, Jesus knew Peter was hurting. Now, Peter wasn't just hurting because he loved Jesus so much. Peter was hurting because he had denied him so much. Remember in that occasion where Jesus said before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times? You see, Peter thought, you got to be talking about somebody else. You got to be talking about somebody else, not me. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I'll be there. And before it, in a short period of time, a rooster crows, and Peter remembers. You see, one of the reasons that theologians tell us that Simon Peter is probably, certainly not the beloved disciple, but that he is a favored one by the public, not by Jesus, but by the public. You know why? Because he reminds me of me, not you. You like him because he reminds you of you. Jesus on that Sunday, that weekday now, resurrection, several days later, Jesus has already appeared to the disciples twice. The first time, Thomas is not there. Jesus makes another appearance. Thomas has already spoken so boldly. I won't believe until I see, until I feel, until I touch. Not understanding Jesus was the seer and the feeler and the toucher. But Thomas was there when Jesus made a second appearance. And he put his hands where the nails had been, and he put his hand where the sword had pierced. And he said, "My Lord and my God." Jesus didn't let that pass so quickly. He said to them, "Do you believe because you see?" He was reminding Thomas last week, a few days ago, you didn't believe. But now you've seen, and now you believe. Thomas is kind of a favorite also of ours. Thomas, kind of reminds me of me. And so when we pick up in today's lesson, but the first verse of the 21st chapter, the disciples, it's been several days now. We don't know how much word or contact or experience they've had with Jesus. And Peter, who is very impulsive, you know, he's the one that races to the tomb and races away from the tomb, gets outrun by John, or the beloved disciple. Again, that's another discussion for another time. The paper did a great job with Mike Ruffin's article this week, because there's always been a question about the beloved disciple. I would hope the 12 disciples would argue among themselves. I'm the favorite. No, I'm. They all wanted to feel that beloved. So there's a question about the author of John and certainly the beloved disciple. But they were together, and they heard Peter say, who's hurting. And don't you know when people around you are hurting? I've learned after a lot of years, I don't have to say to Cindy, is something wrong? Because by the time I ask that, guys, I'm in trouble. But most of us, when we're asked, we got a fairly standard answer. I'm okay. A friend of mine used to say to people all the time, well, you need to let your face know it. Because you got a frown and a scowl. And with your eyes, you pierce the hearts of others. Peter couldn't do it any longer. So wherever they were and whatever they were doing, someone heard Peter say, I'm going fishing. Why would he choose to go fishing? Because he was a fisherman. That's what he knew how to do. He questioned his teaching abilities, his speaking abilities, his socialization, all of that. Fishing is not a team sport. I don't care if you got two bass fishermen in the same boat. They're not on the same team. Because if one sees one catch something over here, the other one throws right where, while that guy's reeling in, his teammate is already thrown in the same spot. We happen to believe that there's so many fish in that spot and so many fish in this spot. I'm going to take Shane Melton fishing one of these days and explain to him about fishing and demonstrate it to him, by the way. Fishing is an isolation part. Simon Peter was going fishing for one reason. He didn't care if he caught anything or not, which meant he was a real fisherman. Because he had more times not than had. What's that they say? That's why we don't call it catching. We call it fishing. But Simon Peter says, nobody asked what you're about to do, Peter, but he says it out loud. So other people would know, leave me alone. Stay away. No trespassing. Stay back 50 feet. Stay back. Leave me alone. Do you understand what a person says to you when they say, leave me alone? They mean, don't leave me. Don't leave me. And on that morning, Jesus said, that afternoon, Jesus said, I'm going fishing. Because Simon Peter knew he had to get away. The problem was Simon Peter was trying to get away from Simon Peter. And Dad Burnett, that person we're trying to run from always stays. A friend of mine used to say all the time, the person that gives me the most trouble is the person that lives and camps in between my elbows. That's you and I, between our own elbows. Simon Peter couldn't live with Simon Peter. And he was doing everything he could to get away and to run and to hide and all of that. And gracious alive, 6 other disciples said, I'm going. One of those 6 was even Thomas, who had a few days earlier, my Lord and my God. I don't know if they needed to get away or not, but you know what they did know? Simon Peter did not need to be alone. And so that love that God has for us, that love that Christ demonstrated for us, they knew Simon Peter was not ready to be left alone. In the late 60s, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross wrote Death and Dying. She had done research on people and how they behave during a terminal illness. Prior to their death, the steps they seemed to be taking. It got so much reading and information, we called it the five stages of death and then renamed it years later the 5 stages of grief. And we all do it differently, and that's okay. Peter was treating his grief by getting away, and nobody would leave him alone. Kubler-Ross called it denial. First of all, it didn't really happen because they had broadened the explanation to someone else in our life, someone very close to us, someone important to us. Dies. It doesn't have to be a lingering death. It could be of a moment episode. But they knew that something changes to those left around. And she talked about denial, and she talked about anger, and she talked about blaming, because when we're hurting, we want somebody else to help carry the load. And so we blame them sometimes to attract them. Sometimes it pushes them away, but our blaming them is to say, I'm not in this alone. You did such and such. You could have helped me. And then they're saying, help me. I learned long time ago when a person cries out, I don't care anymore, means I really care. I really care. Simon Peter was going through all of that. And in Kubler-Ross's discussion, she takes us from the denial, to the anger, to the blaming, and then depression after all of that. And then resolution or acceptance. And that takes a while. The grieving process may take for a few minutes or a few hours or a few days or a few years. We don't any of us do it the right way or the same way. It's right for us, and so we do it. Peter is living out his own denial again. And he's hurting, and he's lonely, and he doesn't want to be left alone. And so he does what he's always known to do. He goes fishing. And like a lot of times, they fish all night and catch nothing. Nothing. And then, the scripture says they were offshore about 100 yards. So way out there from the waters, they could see a person on the beach. And that person cries out, "Friends, have you any fish?" No. No. Peter was used to saying that. In fact, he's beginning to do that deja vu thing. This is sounding familiar. This is looking familiar. Like I've been here and done this. It was the same experience, except in different waters. And the beloved disciple, again, we don't know, but a beloved disciple of Christ from 100 yards away said, "It is the Lord." And Simon Peter became Simon Peter, dove into the water. He didn't worry about taking down nets or anything else because the experience had been made real, because when they said they had no fish, the man on the beach 100 yards away says, "Fish on the other side of the boat." Now, there's not a fisherman alive that likes some other person who's not fishing tell them how to fish. But this was okay, because the beloved and the others, pretty quickly afterwards, said, "It is the Lord. It is the Lord." Peter dives into the water, swims ashore, rushes up to Jesus, and like always, left the others to manage the fish. He gets on the beach and recognizes there's a fire going, a charcoal fire. That's how specific the writer is. He heard it very well, or he saw it very well. And he saw the charcoal fire, and there were fish. Just a few. Because Jesus has him get some of his own. To be specific, the writer says there were 153. When I go fishing and catch a lot of fish, I know what number it wasn't. And the best thing about fishing is the longer they're out of the water, the bigger they get. It's amazing how that happens. And the numbers of them expand also and grow. And I've been fishing a lot of times when I caught 3, and by the time I got home and reported it, there were 9 or 10. And I threw back the big ones. That's why these all little ones are left. My son-in-law and one of my sons and I have a hunting house, cabin we call it. And when we go there, there's a sign that goes right in the door. It said, "Say anything you want to. We accept that it'll be a lie." And it's talking about hunting and fishing. Peter didn't have to lie. Jesus called Peter aside. I don't know if he called him out in public. I don't like that when that happens. In therapy groups, that was one of my roles. And patients knew that if you bring up an issue in group, you're going to talk about that issue in front of God and everybody in Woody. And people don't like to talk about their stuff. Some people say that's why we got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We'd be better if we listened more and talked less. But Peter, right there in the middle of the gathering, breakfast, says to Simon Peter, he doesn't say, "Simon, can I ask you something?" He says, "Simon Peter, son of John, Simon, didn't he? He leaves out Peter, the rock. He's not talking to the rock right now. He's talking to frail, lonely Simon. Simon, do you love me? That's a simple question. Simple answer. Yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he says, feed my lambs. But about time he answers the question, same question. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, Peter is sharp enough to know something's up. We're not just doing this sharing kind of thing going on here. And he'll call the others out eventually. But Simon has no answer except, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Tend my sheep. And seemingly quickly, a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And the writer inserts in there, Peter was hurt because he asked him a third time. We don't do good with the same question. We know when somebody asks us the same question over and over and over again, there's a possibility they'll get a lot of different answers. We've seen it in the movies all the time. The investigator, the detective is interviewing the possible perpetrator, and the lights are bright, shining just on that. Peter felt like the light was shining on him, and it was. It was the shining light of God's love shining all over at that moment, Peter. And Jesus asked him 3 times, and Peter was hurt. Lord, don't you believe me? Don't you believe me? Jesus didn't need to hear Peter say it 3 times. Peter needed to hear himself say it 3 times. Peter was hurt. There's no accident here that just a few days earlier, Peter had denied 3 times. And we call this the complete confession. Peter was carrying the wounds of denial. Although Jesus had specifically sent for him after the resurrection, tell my disciples and Peter, I want to see Peter. And he knew where he could find him. When Peter does his running away, he runs to fish. And Peter recognized it is the Lord. And I think Peter jumped in first and swam the fastest so he could have a little quiet time with his master. Because there were some things he wanted to ask, and he never got around to the question because Jesus asked first. Jesus knew he was hurting. When we look at all of this, it reminds us of our own hurts. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to say, I need some time. It's okay to say, please give me a chance to work through with it in my own head, in my own heart, in my own soul. It's okay. Peter needed to understand Jesus cared. I grew up singing out of the Cokesbury hymnal. I still think it's the finest hymnal we've ever had. And my son, one of my sons, our middle son, and I, these days we play Name That Tune. Not by the name of the tune, but by the number in the Cokesbury hymnal. Because when I was preaching, Daniel was sitting there thumbing through the hymnal. Number 83. How many of you know what number 83 is in the Cokesbury hymnal? Cindy knows. What is it? We rehearsed this at home this morning. I think it's Onward Christian Soldiers, because on Sunday nights, when I would make the mistake of saying, okay, congregation, you name the hymn you want to sing out of. The number you want to sing. Daniel would... And I'd finally say to him after we got home or the next Sunday night before, and Daniel, we're not singing Onward Christian Soldiers tonight. He'll tell you today that's his favorite. 156, Love, Mercy, and Grace. 180, Does Jesus Care? In my preparation, I was looking back at that hymn, Does Jesus Care? Frank Ellsworth Grafe, that name means nothing to you, was a Methodist minister in the Pennsylvania area, meaning a circuit rider. In the 1890s and early 1900s, he was going all over the countryside, preaching and teaching and writing hymns. And he wrote hymns out of his own personal experiences of suffering and trauma and loss. His friends knew him as the sunshine minister. Other people called him the spiritual optimist. And he wrote, Does Jesus Care? Because his life, he was struggling with some losses, with some pain, with a sense of failure, not being able to do enough of all the good things. He even said on one occasion, I'm just like the Apostle Paul. Everything I say I won't do, I will do, if it's something I shouldn't do. Listen to this. You'll remember these words. Does Jesus care when my heart is pained too deeply for mirth or song? As the burdens press and the cares distress and the way grows weary and long? Does Jesus care when my way is dark, with a nameless dread and fear? As the daylight fades into deep night shades, does he care enough to be near? Does Jesus care when I've tried and failed to resist some temptation strong, when for my deep grief there is no relief, though my tears flow all night long? Does Jesus care when I've said goodbye to the dearest on earth to me, and my sad heart aches till it nearly breaks? Is it aught to him? Does he see? And then that chorus, sounding loud and strong. Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. His heart is touched with my grief. When the days are weary, the long nights dreary, I know my Savior cares. Jesus was questioning Peter to say, I care. I care. The troubles of these days are big, real, but they're not the powerful. They're not the most powerful. They're not the strongest. They're not the deepest. And this too shall pass. I don't know when, but it shall change. And so when we look at all of this, we understand that Christ is Lord, risen today, living in our hearts and in our minds, and God cares about you as an individual. You think it's an accident we all showed up here today? I mean, I knew I was supposed to be here, but you honestly had a choice. I'm a fan of Waffle House, okay? Not necessarily because of the food, but by their motto. They used to do it on a little plaque about 10 by 10 above the grill, on the wall above the grill, said these words: you had a choice and you chose us. Thank you. Now it's on the back of your little yellow ticket, those same words. You had and you did. You could have gone to eat anywhere. You had a choice and you chose us. And I want to tell you, this morning, listening online, sitting right here, you had a choice. You may feel like you didn't. Some of you felt like, well, Woody's preaching. Well, I'm grateful. I'm glad you're here. Remember the old sermon the guy was preaching? He said during the sermon, oh, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one. Numerous people shouted out, so would we. but the goodness of God is alive and real. And we get to celebrate that, not as a memorial meal, but just as though we're having friends over now for lunch.